Hello gang. So, throughout the last month or so, I've been well just under a month obviously because it's not quite February yet, I have been trying to plan and film a video. That video being the books that I read last year, and there's been all sorts of technical difficulties, interruptions, issues with all sorts of different things. And also the fact that I've had my preliminary exams, so I've kind of been a bit busy. But we're just going to go through them now, and that's going to be that. I don't have physical copies of any of them with me. I mean, they're in back there somewhere. But I'm just going to talk through them with you, and I might have pictures up for some of them, I might not. We'll see how this fricking goes. But I read, how many books? Yeah, 12 books this year. Last year, anyway. I read 12 books in 2019, and here are all the books. Here are the books I'm speaking of. Okay. So the first one is a play, not a book, but we're still counting it, which is The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. I read this because firstly, I didn't read a lot in the first 3 or 4 months of my school. I read this book because it was mentioned in class, and I had to read it for my written drama exam. So I read it in about 2 days because I got hooked and interested in the characters. It is a hilarious play that I would give 5 stars in terms of reading. That is incredibly intelligent, and it's sort of if you don't know of Oscar Wilde, well, he was a genius and you should do your own research, but this play in particular was a critique of Victorian society. I cannot speak today, you're just gonna have to deal with that. But in a very entertaining fashion, so opposed to being like, the upper class, it was funny. And there's a quote that I have written down here because I wanted to get it exactly right. That is a pun that Jack says, who's one of the characters, and I found it so funny. Everyone else in this class and just in general who have talked about the book didn't find it particularly funny, but I thought it was freaking hilarious, which is, Jack, my dear Algie, you talk exactly as if you were a dentist. It is very vulgar to talk like a dentist when one isn't a dentist. It produces a false impression. As in the dental procedure? No, just me? Okay, it's fine. He didn't just spend all of his time writing this masterpiece for it to be ignored, but it's fine. If only I found it funny. But also, obviously, it's a play. Plays are meant to be seen and not read, so I would recommend going to see it if you'd like to. I watched an online production. Well, I watched a production that had been uploaded to YouTube for free. It wasn't a bootleg because it was the people themselves that uploaded it, and I really enjoyed it. So I would also recommend going and seeing it live because I would kill for that, and I would love to hear, all of that. And the second book I read this year is Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. This is a sort of gay must read in the booktube community, particularly of YA. It's very sort of read Simon versus the Homo sapiens Agenda. I give 3.5 stars. If you don't know, Simon versus the Homo sapien Agenda is the book that got that the film Love, Simon came from. The adaptation Love, Simon is an adaptation of this book. I can't speak. And I've never actually watched the film because I just never really got around to it. I read the book so I could see the film, and then I never saw the film after reading it. So this is 3.5 stars, which I know is particularly low, but this was, I enjoyed it, and I thought it was incredibly interesting and a sweet love story, and I loved the emails and all of that jazz. But I sort of thought that, I don't know, I felt like the friendship was a bit it just sort of felt a bit sort of unhealthy, the way they treated him after everything happened, but still loved it, still gave it 3.5 stars, still would recommend. The next book I read, clearly I loved it enough to immediately move on to the sequel, which is what I did. This is Leah on the Offbeat by the same author. This book, weirdly enough, I gave 4 stars, so I clearly preferred it to the first one. It might be because it was written about a woman, which sounds horrible, but I feel like when you're closer to an experience, you like when it's easier to empathize with the character as yourself, you tend to enjoy an experience more. However, it is still incredibly important to, broaden your horizons and read about all sorts of different people and everything. But because this person was a woman, I felt it slightly easier to read. But that might not be the only reason. I just thought it was a very sweet love story. Well, it's not really about the love, but stuff happens. It's not about the romance, really. Neither was, well, Simon vs. Homo sapien Agenda was about that, but not in the same way. Like not in a typical way. It wasn't like it was a bit, there was other things involved, obviously. But Leah and the Offbeat, I just felt so much empathy towards Leah. And there was a scene which obviously I can't empathize with, as like I am an empath, but I couldn't, obviously, like, this isn't my experience, but I did empathize with it, which was there's a scene, I can't tell you the chapter or the context really. I think she's buying her prom dress, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, and she's sitting in the changing rooms or outside the changing rooms or something, and she hears girls talking and going, and just like I don't even want to explain it to you, because if you've not read it, read the book. And it's just a heartbreaking moment for me anyway when I was reading it. But yeah, 4 stars, really would recommend. Okay, so the 4th book I read this year was Percy Jackson and the Battle of the Labyrinth, which I'd give 4 stars. Usually, honestly, most Percy Jackson books for me have been 5 stars. However, I read this in the middle of a reading slump and just sort of pushed through it, so that's why it's only 4. Obviously, it's the best experience to read a book is when you're enthralled in reading just in general, but life happens. Obviously it's incredibly interesting because all of Rick Riordan's books are a freaking joy to read, and his writing is so not appealing, but just it draws you in. And I just really enjoyed it. But also Nico D'Angelo. I love Nico. He's one of my faves, and I love that character. And I was so glad to see him in this book. That's honestly all I can remember. But because again, not only that, but also all of the first 4 books, because they're the only ones I've read of this series, sort of mashed together in my head anyway. So yeah, but 10 out of 10, well, 8 out of 10 would read again. Okay, the next one is mayhaps my favourite book of the year, if not one of them, which is Carry On by Rainbow Rowell. Now obviously I say of the year, this book came out in 2017, 2016, something like that. It might have been 2015. It came out a few years ago, so it's not of the year, but it was for me because I'd never read it before. I gave this 5 stars because, my goodness, it gave me feelings. But I had read Eleanor and Park, and I had read Fangirl, obviously, before reading this, and I really enjoyed it. If you're unaware, and obviously, this is a spoiler, but this is a very stereotypical, like, chosen one storyline. I think the tagline is literally Simon Snow is the worst chosen one to ever be chosen, or something along those lines. And it's just incredibly sweet, and also a romance towards the sort of end of it, and it's so sweet. And Baz is such a brilliant character, and I really enjoyed this book. And this is one of the few books that didn't reread the whole book because it's like long, but I do go back and just reread scenes sometimes, because I don't tend to do that with books often, but with that I was just like, I need to feel the emotion and just be like, so yeah, that was what happened. The next book, I don't know if I gave a rating. I'd probably give it 3 stars, maybe 2.5, which was Stargirl by Jerry Spinelli, which I know giving it a half or lower rating is probably quite a controversial opinion, but I don't know, it was a very interesting tale of nonconformity, that definitely, and it kind of made me uncomfortable reading, and I don't know why. because it wasn't her non-conformity that made me uncomfortable, because I thought she was so cool, she was awesome, but I just sort of, I don't know, I just think whatever is Leo the main character's name? I don't remember if that's his name or not. Whatever the main character's name is, clearly wasn't that memorable. It seemed like he made it about himself. I know it's a first person, it's from his perspective, so of course that's what it's going to feel like, but it just sort of, I don't know, I would love to see a book from her perspective, and see how she thinks entirely. So yeah, that's all I've got for that. I didn't give it a rating on Goodreads excuse me, I'm disgusting, when it was put there, but because I don't actually know. So read it if you want to, don't if you don't, I don't know. The next book we have is The Great Gatsby, which I had to read for school, and is part of my English exam this year, which is why I actually, read it begrudgingly. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. This is a book that is interesting to analyse. I will give it that, because that is what I'm doing for this exam. I am analysing this and the themes and characters and all of that jazz. But okay, let's see what I've written here, because I kind of wrote a lot of criticism, but it's been my rating has been boosted up a bit because of the fact of its interesting analysis, because it is interesting to analyse, but just sort of reading it for the sake of reading it is like, it's not interesting. So it is uninteresting. It's incredibly uninteresting. The plot is mediocre as far as I'm concerned, and the characters aren't, they're not a whole lot. The language is, I love flowery language, but it's overly stupidly flowery. Like, it's getting in the way of me knowing what the heck you're talking about without having to listen to the audiobook level of flowery. So didn't like that. Yeah, and the story is incredibly interesting, and the characters, I like Daisy. That's my thing. I like Daisy. I think Daisy's a brilliant character, but the rest of them I could not care less about. Gatsby's not interesting. Nick's just another clueless narrator. Tom's just a racist, sexist bigot. It's very, I don't really care. I thought Jordan was cool. It's about the extent of it. I didn't have a whole lot of, So yeah, 2.5 stars. Okay, this next book broke me. I don't know if it's going to be a favourite of mine. It was a favourite of mine. Well, it's a favourite. I don't know if it was one of, my favourite, because it made me sad. Which was Final Draft by Riley Redgate, which people were raving about when it came out. When it came out, I couldn't tell you the year. Maybe 2018 or 19, or maybe even earlier than that. But Jesus Christ, that book gave me frickin' feels, man. It was such a heartbreaking book. It was incredibly easy to read, however. It wasn't like a struggle. Like, the language was fine, and it was one of those things that you can sort of just read it whenever. It's like sometimes with books you have to put in a lot of effort. This one was not that. And also, and this might be disagreed with upon different people maybe, but I think I had a really good grasp of nerd culture. So for example, there's a lot of nerdy things that nerds nerd out over that are sort of that represent nerd culture badly, in my opinion, or sort of represent teendom and teen culture and nerd culture and all of that jazz. For example, Be More Chill. Like, I love that show, but it just doesn't understand how teenagers speak. But this really understood it well for me, I think. I really like them sitting and watching it. I get that. And talking about the fan fiction and talking about the books, like that, just that whole thing, yeah, that's me. That's me and my friends. I get it, But yeah, 5 stars was what I gave that book, because it's heartbreaking, and I'm not going to spoil it for you anymore. Go on, fricking read it. Okay, this next one is Secrets from the Mad by Dodie, which I gave 3 stars, I think. Which is horrible to think about, because Dodie, formerly known as Dodie Clark, now Dodie lowercase d, who is a artist and singer here on YouTube. I love her. I love her content, and I think her singing is phenomenal and emotional and has brought me to tears on many occasions. However, I just don't like memoirs and autobiographies. They're just not my thing. I say that, I have like 3 to read, but that's because they're interesting people and I think they will be worth the read, even though generally speaking, got a thing on my tongue, generally speaking, they're not quite my jazz. It's like Lauren Graham, who was Lorelai in Gilmore Girls. I tried to read hers. I read about a chapter and just got bored. So yeah, but let's actually talk about the book. So for example, it had really nice, the themes were really interesting to me. So like that, it talks about alcohol, about friendship, relationships, and mental health. Not all relatable to me, obviously, but all incredibly interesting, and I like to hear her perspective. But yeah, also I wish I'd gotten it on audiobook, because I would love to hear it being, I would far prefer to listen to an audiobook, a memoir or an autobiography than I do read one, but that's personal taste. So yeah, next one is The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. This book was booktubeculture.com/books whenever it came out. This book, from what I know, was like huge. But that was a few years ago now, and now everyone forgets it exists. But it was a quick read for me. It was like I read it in like 2 days quick. And incredibly easy to read and incredibly enjoyable. It seemed beautiful to me. The ending was a bit sort of cheesy, but I can excuse it because, you know, it's YA, what are you going to do? But I thought the perspective was so interesting, like Natasha's whole perspective, just phenomenally interesting, and I want to know so much about her. However, I did kind of feel a little bit like Daniel following her at the beginning was a bit creepy. Like, is that just me? Probably not, but I've never watched anyone talk about this book before. But to me, it's felt a little bit creepy. But that's all I've got to say about that. And is this the last book I read? I don't even remember. No, it's not. The second last book that I read in 2019 was They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. This book came out in 2017, and I bought it in 2017, and I started reading it and just went, nope, and then left it for 2 years. So here we are. This book, speaking of emotional books, this book was emotional as hell. This book, I cried a lot during this book. The premise is basically that there's this thing called Deathcast, which is sort of like an online, they like sort of call you and tell you within 24 hours of your death that you're going to die in the next 24 hours. And it's sort of just, that's a weird thing to think about, like those thoughts of death. Wow. But this book, my goodness, I can't even speak to you about it because I'm just like, it was just brilliantly written. Adam Silvera, I've never read any of his other work, however I have seen him partake in sort of YouTube things, and I feel like I would love his other work. Never read it yet, but this book, excuse me, just stabbed me to death. Like, that was a lot. Okay, and also 5 stars, obviously. This last one is not really a book so much as it is an essay collection or speech collection, which is Greta Thunberg. No one is too small to make a difference. That book, I read that in, I don't know how much time, but I just sat and read through it, and it maybe took me an hour. Keeping in mind I have I've watched a lot of her speeches before, so I did like skim through the parts that I knew before, because there was no point in me reading the whole, like, you know, the ones that I thought were anyway, moving on from that. I'd read it before, so I was more familiar with it, so it didn't take me as long as it would to someone who's never even heard of Greta Thunberg. But even still, it was so inspiring, and it made me want to get up and do change. Obviously I didn't, because it was like 8 p.m. and it was dark outside and there's nothing I could really had school the next day, do you know what I mean? And I know that's our whole thing, but I had school that anyway, not the point. It was inspiring as hell, and it made me want to do stuff. So yeah. And a lot of people, I went on Goodreads, and after I did my review, I'd put a review on Goodreads, and I sort of was scrolling through the other ones just because I occasionally do that, just out of curiosity. And a lot of people were saying that it was incredibly repetitive and they found it incredibly uninteresting, even though they were fans of her. And I just think, well, yeah, no, of course it's gonna be repetitive. It's her speeches in different places talking to different people, so they won't have all heard it before. But I still thought it was very worth my while and just a nice thing to have. It's just such a good thing to have, I think, as an activist. Okay, thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, you may know what to do. Please remember to drink your water, eat your vegetables, and peace out, I guess.